welcome to the Kingdom of Pinfall, where I, Michelle, will guide you on an imaginary wrestling adventure. This is episode 5, aka chapter 5. Please start with chapter 1 and proceed in order. Click on my link tree in the description if you're interested in my other projects and things I'm selling. I actually axed my Redbubble account recently after a series of events. Perhaps by the time this episode goes live, I will have found a replacement for that. And in other news, in my headcanon, Charlotte's entrance music is actually a string quartet rendition of Jolene by Dolly Parton, and sometimes Africa by Toto. I fluctuate between the two, and I need you to imagine these songs playing whenever Charlotte appears in a scene, because I can't include this as actual music in the podcast. I provided some links for these beautiful songs in the description, and if you'd like, pick one and play it whenever Charlotte is present. The Charlotte haters can eat my asshole. So on that note, I am really unsure at what point I need to flag these episodes as explicit. I don't particularly understand ratings in general on anything in life. There was some adult language in the last chapter, but I think it was like a PG-13 or TV-14 level. But again, I don't understand ratings. I guess I could look it up. Maybe I will. But not right now. And as far as this chapter goes, it's got violence, adult language, me doing bad accents, and the usual overly dramatic music and sound effects. This episode has been marked as explicit because I think there's enough F-words this time. So let's get going and see if I killed those unicorns. Chapter 5. Some audiences with some queens. None of the realms have ever wanted to claim Parts Unknown, although it stretches across all of Pinfall. It isn't really suitable for life, not normal life at least, and it's said to be haunted. The grass is sparse and patchy. The forested sections have trees with gray bark and drooping branches. Everything is tangled in thorny vines, and there's always an eerie mist settled on the ground. The animals there are not cute woodland creatures, but instead wyverns, manticores, and giant spiders. There are people too, but it's best to avoid them at all costs, lest risk being indoctrinated into a cult or cannibalized. The legends purport that Parts Unknown is the place where the forces of evil first entered Pinfall. A huge tear was ripped in the fabric of reality, and the forces of evil flowed into Pinfall like a tidal wave from the pits of Heel. From there they marched across the land, bringing the first WrestleMania and leaving this dreary region in their wake. The demons tainted the land irrevocably, and it never recovered. Parts Unknown became shrouded in myth and superstition. Pinfall's travelers only half believed the old stories, and yet seldom entered the region. Those that did enter seldom came back out, and if they did, they didn't come back out quite the same. There are designated safe paths that cut across scrubland, and no places to stop along these roads, not until reaching the other side. The legends about Parts Unknown, like the other legends mentioned thus far, are completely true. Mostly. People are right to be paranoid and superstitious about the land at least. The injured unicorns, healed by a bit of Xavier's magic, refused to get within 15 feet of the gloomy trees and went on their way after the New Day bid farewell to them. Big E gives his unicorns several handfuls of bootios. They could be summoned again by Francesca later, of course, but they would not come while their riders were in Parts Unknown. R-Truth runs circles around the group as they limp and drag themselves into the woodland, nursing their own wounds and battered pride. Alexa eyes Truth curiously, wondering not only why, but how he is zipping around tirelessly. Sometimes he moves so quickly that he's just a blur. When he stops, he isn't remotely winded. No one bothers asking him about this. There is no path for them, and they trudge right into the forest, stomping on and slashing their way through prickly bushes. When they step into the trees, the light fades behind them and everything becomes dim. It is as if the sunlight doesn't even want to venture into parts unknown. It startles them all, and they pause, except R-Truth, who continues running in widening circles, somehow not tripping on the underbrush. Nikki looks up to make sure Alexa is still above them, and she notices that the sky looks like dusk before a storm, but it was certainly not that late when they entered. Alexa joins them on the ground. The branches are too tangled and twisted for her to comfortably fly through. No one speaks for a while, and there are no chirping birds. There's only the sound of their footfalls. Nikki walks behind Alexa and begins pulling more debris from her hair. Sonia rides on Otis, who has remained in bear form, both of them in states of great despair. No one speaks for a time. "Are we sure about this?" Sonia asks, whispering because she doesn't want to disturb anything that might be lurking in the shadows. "Maybe we should just turn around and go toward the ring instead, rescue Mandy, and get the SmackDown tag belts back." Maybe. Otis the bear snorts, agreeing. The portal that Rude opened, surely taking them and Mandy to King Corbin. "Tucky?" Otis prompts, hoping for his support. "The original plan was to go to the Forgotten Lands, man," Tucker says. "We can't just abandon that." "But we can abandon Mandy?" Sonia is appalled and still keeps her voice down. "Let's just keep moving," Kofi insists. "We'll figure everything out once we get out of here." "This place is giving me the heebie-jeebies," says Big E, and they all keep moving. No one knows exactly where they're going or what they're looking for, and they begin to think it was absolutely stupid to do anything brought to them in a vague message by R-Truth from Charlotte Flair. No one says this aloud, though. "That trail of Swarovski crystals would be cool right about now," Kofi jokes out of nowhere, desperately wanting to lighten the mood. Forced, awkward laughter from the group shatters the silence but then tapers off again. As they trudge farther inward, they start to see structures. There are some decrepit shacks. Soon the shacks turn into abandoned houses along what used to be a thoroughfare. They follow the unkept road into a full-fledged ghost town. Windows are busted out, doors hang onto rusty hinges, and ancient signs have fallen from storefronts. The story said that there used to be cities in parts unknown, towns, civilization, before it became parts unknown, that is. "Y'all sure this is where we're supposed to go?" R-Truth asked them, finally coming to a stop and seeming to realize where he is. "Man, it got dark quick!" He looks up at the sky and squints. Tucker flatly reminds him, "You were the one who brought us the message saying to come here." Parts Unknown is pretty big, like, very big. Alexa flies up above them again, getting the lay of the land now that the trees have thinned. "Are you sure there wasn't a slightly more specific location? We might not be anywhere near where we're supposed to be." "This is starting to seem a bit like a bad idea," Kofi says, but in a sing-song voice, trying not to sound overly worried. "It always sounded like a bad idea to me," Sonia mumbles. "We should have just gone straight for Nitro and ignored any and all nonsense from Charlotte. You all would still probably have your belts, and Mandy wouldn't have been kidnapped by Dolph." A raven lets out a very loud and rather angry-sounding caw, startling them all. The New Day all cling on to one another and squeal. "Just a bird," Big E announces confidently, patting Xavier and Kofi on their backs comfortingly, and they disperse. A huge black raven lands on the remnants of what probably used to be a fence. The fence is now a bunch of graying stakes jutting from the earth. R-Truth shrieks and cowers behind E when he sees the bird. The raven cocks its head to the side, looking at all of them, and then opens its beak. Something shiny falls to the ground and rolls to Xavier's feet. He bends down and picks up the tiny object. It glitters in the sun, and he says, "It's a Swarovski crystal." "Maybe the bird ate Charlotte," Sonia suggests flatly. No one can tell if she's joking or not. The raven clicks its beak and hops on a post to move closer to her. Otis the bear takes a very cautious step toward the bird and sniffs it, then backs up quickly. Sonia has to grab handfuls of hair on the scruff of his neck to not fall off as he scrambles, nearly tripping over his own feet. The bird then spreads its wings and glides down from the fence. Before it hits the ground, it turns into a twisting black and purple mist. It swirls and grows in size. When the mist dissipates, the raven has been replaced by the queen. "You've got jokes," she says to Sonia in a similarly flat tone as she adjusts the high feathered collar of her robe. The feathered accents of the robe match the feathers of the raven. "Trail of Swarovski crystals. Bird ate Charlotte." Very funny. Charlotte isn't laughing at all. "Told you she hears everything." Big E leans over and says to Sonia. Charlotte then looks toward him. Her eyes narrow and she asks, "Where's your belt?" Well, you see," he starts to explain. "Where are all of your belts?" She doesn't let him finish. Then without looking, she reaches up and grabs Alexa's ankle to jerk her back down to the ground with the rest of them, not liking her buzzing around above her. "And why is one of you missing?" "My belt's right here," Truth announces and opens up the front of his cloak to show her. "I got mine." We kind of lost them on the way here," Kofi confesses and rubs the back of his neck. He doesn't make eye contact with her. "And Mandy was taken by Dolph Ziggler," Sonia tells her. Her expression doesn't change, and everyone waits for her to say something. She just stands there, looking at them blankly, which is worse than her being disappointed or angry. No one is sure if she's about to kill them all or not. The silence seems to stretch on for several minutes before Charlotte clasps her hands in front of her and clears her throat. She looks down for a moment, preparing herself. When she looks up, she begins yelling, "Are you fucking kidding me?" She gestures broadly at all of them and points at Truth. "Our Truth is the only one of you that made it here without somehow losing his belt." She shrugs dramatically before going on. "And you let Mandy be kidnapped by an idiot minion of King Corbin of all people. What the fuck?" Another, more brief moment of silence follows, and then she bursts out laughing. The New Day look ashamed, sheepish, and they remain quiet. Nikki is giving Alexa a back massage while she shifts around awkwardly. After Charlotte's insane laughter subsides, she asks, "Any of you plan to get them back? The belts, not Mandy. That's more of a side quest." "You don't have a belt," Nikki comments defensively. "That's not remotely your concern." She gives her a condescending, closed-lipped smile. Wood steps up then and asks, "Why did you want us to come here?" "I was going to show you morons how to use the magic contained in the belts of power. But now you don't have any, so..." She shrugs again. "Looks like he came here for nothing because Truth knows how to use his. Wow. Good job. You all have totally been shown up by our Truth." "That's right," Truth says proudly and struts around in front of them. She laughs again. "We are absolutely fucked if you all are the best heroes Pinfall can shit out." "Why do you want to help us?" Nikki asks, sounding accusatory. She doesn't answer and instead points to something behind them. They all turn and see an old sign that is barely legible, but they can make out that it says WrestleMania. It looks like it may have once been a very elaborate sign with brightly colored LED lights, but now it's gray and weathered. "But why?" Xavier then asks with more emphasis when he turns back to face her. Charlotte blinks and studies him for a moment. "Did you know that the first champions, the ones who fought in the WrestleManias of old, were made into gods by the Titan of Pinfall?" "That's how the stories go," Big E chimes in. "The stories also say that you're the descendant of a god." "Very good. Gold star for Big E." She then looks at Xavier. "Obviously, for that reason, I want to stop the forces of evil. It's my legacy. Besides, I can't very well be the queen if there's nothing for me to be the queen of now, can I? Excuse me, Sonia speaks up. But what exactly are you the queen of right now? Everyone looks at her nervously and Charlotte chuckles. So are you like legit half god? Xavier eyes her, waving Francesca at her a bit. She gives him a slight shrug, still laughing. Excuse me, Alexei is the goddess, Nikki says defensively. Charlotte looks at her again, and then at Alexa, still laughing. She's a forest sprite. At best, she's a woodland fairy, so please stop talking. Nikki starts to make a lunge for Charlotte, but Alexa extends her arm to hold her at bay. Amused, Charlotte goes on. I suppose you're all still useful, even without your belts at the moment. You're traveling to the Forgotten Lands of Nitro, are you not? Charlotte continues. You're seeking the ancient contracts because they contain all of the knowledge of each of the belts of power. How did you know what we were planning? Xavier questions. Because I'm the queen. I'm half god. We literally just went over this. She snaps at him a little, then continues her monologue. You all know the legends. You know you need to rally the 4 realms. The belts of power must belong to honorable champions that the others in the realms will follow into the WrestleMania to defeat the forces of evil and close all of the heel gates. Are you saying that the infighting needs to stop? Kofi asks her, amused. You're saying this. She gives him a glance. Now I don't have to say it because you did. Thank you. She paces back and forth in front of them a few times. I'll deal with the realm of Raw, and I can address Sasha and Bailey when the time comes. Find Braun Strowman. Last I heard he was pursuing the Intercontinental Belt of Power. Help him get it. Roman Reigns and his little sidekick Daniel Bryan. Find them. They're valuable. What about the NXT realms? Tucker asks her with a slight bow of his head, attempting to be respectful. She smiles at him a little. Those are lawless lands, but the belts are strong, and heroes are emerging on their own in NXT. She shrugs. All of their belts of power belong to the forces of evil, and NXT UK is nearly completely overrun by demons and corruption. We'll see how this plays out and cross that bridge later. Alexa's eyebrows raise curiously, and she spits out, Asuka's looking for Becky. Charlotte's face twitches, almost imperceptibly. She says nothing and otherwise doesn't react. Where is Becky? Alexa then asks, having tested the waters. People will follow her if we can get her to join us. With a chuckle, people only follow her because she's using the belts of power she has and not even realizing it. Charlotte suddenly shakes her head. Don't concern yourself with Becky right now. Find the ancient contracts and rally the realm of SmackDown. She looks them all over a final time and observes, None of you trust me. It's probably for the best. Black and purple mist spirals around her, and the Raven flies away to the east, toward the bridge of SummerSlam at the border of SmackDown and Raw. Well then, Biggie puts his hands on his hips. I guess we need to split up. He clenches his fists and says, Let's Scooby-Doo this. We're doing what she said? Nikki is surprised. What if she's trying to split us up so she can kill us all? Sonia asks them, completely serious. She's not. Alexa answers quickly, correcting her. She doesn't trust us either, if that's any consolation. I mean, we did manage to lose all of the belts we had, so... How do you know? Asks Nikki. She sighs. It's one of my little woodland fairy powers. I can see into people's souls when they touch me, and she grabbed my ankle, which I suspect she probably knew. You never told me this. Nikki is being bombarded with surprises, and her brow is firmly knitted. Let a girl have some secrets, damn. Alexa flies above them again to look around. So you've changed your tune, just like that. Xavier wonders and looks up at her. Slightly, she admits. Nikki and I will go through Raw and get the ancient contracts. I think we can manage that. With no belts, we won't be targets, and no one takes us seriously anyway, so I think we can get there the easiest. We'll find Braun, Xavier nods and motions to the other members of the New Day. We'll go to the ring, I guess, Tucker decides, and then looks at Sonya and Otis. We'll get the SmackDown tag belts of power back and complete the side quest. What about Truth? Kofi asks. And then they all realize R-Truth has disappeared. He then says with a shrug, never mind. Big E reaches into his pack and pulls out another box of Bootios. He opens it, and then they pass it around. Sonya gets off of Otis's back and walks toward the WrestleMania sign. She looks at the relic and then reaches out and touches around some of the broken lights that once formed the word. The sign also once had an arrow on it, it appears. It points to the north. Her eyes drift up the wide road that cuts through this strange city whose name has been lost to time. Farther to the east, another group of heroes gathers at a rickety wooden table in the corner of a tavern called Take Over the Tavern. None of them have belts either. Tommaso Ciampa's elbow is propped on the table, and his chin rests in his hand, ruffling his beard. He sighs. Across from him sits Keith Lee, the hood of his sweatshirt casting his face in shadow. Dominik Dijakovic sits next to Lee and wraps his fingers on the tabletop. Johnny Gargano joins them a few minutes later, sliding onto the bench next to Ciampa. The newcomer says with grim sincerity, NXT UK is about to fall. There's nothing we can do. No reinforcements are coming from the other realms. That's not the news we wanted to hear. Ciampa sighs again. Don't give up hope, bros! Matt Riddle comes over from the bar bringing several flagons of ale. The other 4 men turn slowly to look at him, and Ciampa asks, Who are you again? He hands the ale out to them one by one and stands at the end of their table. He ignores the question and says, I couldn't help but overhear the anguish of like-minded hero-type bros that want to save the realm of NXT, and I am here to assist with the Stallion Battalion. Riddle, leave him alone and get back here. Pete Dunne shouts across the room and tries to usher Matt back to where they were sitting, which was much too far away for him to simply have overheard their conversation. Please come retrieve him, Pete, Dijakovic yells at him. Bro! Matt tries again, this time focusing on Dominik. Hear me out! Riddle! Pete interrupts him and stands up abruptly, knocking over his chair, drawing even more attention to himself that he didn't want. Bro! Matt yells at Pete. Hold on! He looks back at the other 4 men. Just hear me out, other bros. There is strength in numbers. Let us join you. He motions quickly back and forth between himself and Pete, who is stomping toward him, reaching out like he's going to strangle him when he gets to him. Me and my best bro Pete, we're gonna get the tag belts of power from Fish and that other guy, you see. If one of you can get the NXT belt of power and the North American belt of power, we'll have a bunch of belts. Then we gotta figure out how the magic works and we'll kick asses. Super bros. As Pete reaches him and grabs onto his arm, they all hear someone say, She's coming. Silence rushes the tavern like a wave. Ciampa looks at Pete and mutters a single word, Sit. Even Matt quiets as he and Pete pull up chairs to the table. A deck of cards appears in Dijak's hands, and he doles them out along with a pile of coins that he drops haphazardly into the center of the table. Johnny begins chugging the ale that was gifted to him. The door to the tavern swings open a moment later, and they all make like they're in the midst of an intense poker game as the door slams into the wall. The Queen of Spades stands in the entrance with 2 shadowy figures behind her, Jessamine and Marina. Shayna saunters in, flaunting the NXT Women's Belt of Power, unafraid of challengers. She scans the room and then proceeds to the bar, flanked by the horsewomen. The conversation begins to pick up again as she takes a seat. Matt looks at his cards and says, Bros, I've got a full house. You're not supposed to tell everyone what cards you have, you fucking idiot. Pete elbows him in the ribs, and he lets out a loud oof before gasping to catch his breath again. Pete throws his coin pouch in front of him on the table. Let's do this proper then. He points to the coins that Dijakovic threw on the table. That the buy-in? Guess so, he says, and they begin to earnestly play because they can't very well discuss anything with Shayna just a few feet away. Several hands in, Shayna gets up. She looks around casually, tosses some coins to the bartender, and then begins moving toward their table with her belt flung over her shoulder. She sits at the end of the bench, shoving Johnny into Champa. She asks, "So what are you up to, guys? Cards? Deal me in." It's Champa's deal, and he gives her the most pleasant smile he can muster, hoping his beard is scruffy enough to obscure how absolutely insincere it is. He deals her in, and the playing continues, very seriously and too quietly. Keith is afraid they aren't talking enough, and it seems suspicious. So he says, "And how are you doing on this fine evening, Shayna?" "Oh, you know." She looks at her cards and frowns. "I've killed everyone that's come after my belt, so that's good. Have you heard of anyone else thinking about coming for my belt?" Nope, he answers. They all mutter nopes of agreement. "Is that so?" she asks as the game continues. "None of you happen to know the whereabouts of one Rhea Ripley?" The men all shake their heads. She raises her bet when it comes back around to her and asks, "What about Bianca Belair?" More negatory head shaking occurs. "You guys wouldn't lie to me, right?" A chorus of no's and absolutely nots follow, and the game continues without incident. Shayna doesn't win and doesn't seem upset. She tosses her cards down, bids them farewell, rallies her troops, and starts to leave. They keep playing and try to keep an eye on her without it being apparent that they're keeping an eye on her. She hesitates at the door and turns back around. She looks right at Champa. He looks down at his cards. Her eyes then drift to a table near the door where Jordan Devlin and some other refugees from the realm of NXT UK are sitting. She locks eyes with Jordan, who freezes. In a split second, she's standing in front of him with her hand in his chest. Everyone sees her hand has sunken into him before they hear the snapping noise of his ribs being broken by her fist. The man's mouth falls open and he blinks. He tries to speak, but only a gurgle comes out, followed by a rush of blood. His head lolls back as Shayna rips her hand out from inside of him. His ribs crack more, and there's a sickening suction noise. Her fist is covered with blood up past her wrist. She looks around the room, her face expressionless, and then she kicks his chair over, sending his body rolling onto the floor. Champa is looking up again. Everyone is looking up at this point. It's unavoidable now, and they're all frozen by the scene that played out in mere seconds for seemingly no reason. Shayna's eyes wander back to Champa. He stares at her coldly but does not move. She smiles and then leaves, closing the door behind her. Alright, well, wasn't that fun? Tune in next week for Chapter 6. Where's Becky? Where is Becky? I hope no one minds that I totally killed Jordan Devlin. Sorry about that, I guess. I didn't have any strong feelings about him, and there needed to be some death. So, I hope I've made Shayna way cooler than she has been on Raw. It is picking up kind of a little bit with her. She is an excellent villain and has been grossly misused. Next week, I have drawn a map of the Kingdom of Pinfall, and I'm going to put that on my Patreon. Just by the way, if that will help. I might add to it as things progress a little bit, but it's a pretty extensive map already. It'll kind of give you a feel for where the realms are within the kingdom, and you can sort of see where everything is in relation to everything else. It's not necessarily to scale, but it'll give you a general idea of major landmarks. yeah, so thanks for listening. Tune in next week. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.